You know, podcasts are on the rise, and you can find them on just about any subject you can think of, and some you've never thought of. And a lot of you watching right now may have a podcast of your own, but did you know there's actually podcast insurance out there that you might need to consider? I spoke with Eddie Munoz of Alliance Insurance. He says it basically comes in two parts.
Your coverage A is what we like to call kind of like your slip and trip coverage. So that would cover things such as bodily injury and property damage to third parties. For instance, the way I kind of explain to people, and this is a scenario would be somebody was to come into your studio where you hold a lot of guests. A guest was to trip on some equipment that you have laying around and were to suffer an injury. You know, they could seek compensation for their medical bills from you in a lawsuit. And that's kind of where your bodily injury protection would kind of be built in to protect you.
So the other part deals more with just copyright issues and that type of thing.
Your commercial general liability is your coverage B, and that covers items such as personal and advertising injury liability coverage. So typically what that would cover is a person or business personal or intellectual rights if you were to cause damage to one of those. What I like to explain to people, so that would cover things such as like copyright infringement, libel, slander, items such as that nature.
Because if you think about it with podcasts, you know, sometimes it depends on what type of podcast you have, but if you have one that's a little bit controversial and people are giving their opinions and you have to edit it and they think you edit, you know, stuff we deal with, in TV. So he says you need to check with an insurance specialist like himself before you say, oh, I'm covered, I got coverage A and coverage B, because sometimes they need something extra called a media liability coverage, and that will cover libel or slander depending on how you're delivering this product. So it's a lot to think about.
I think this is so interesting because there's so many podcasts out there. I have friends who have podcasts. It's something that I've even thought about, but it's becoming more popular and is relatively new. So I didn't even realize there was something like this out there. And as I was reading more about it, beyond tripping over a cable in the studio, say someone has an allergic reaction to something in the studio, they can sue you for that as well. So I think anything that you can do to protect yourself in a situation or an arena that's so new as it is, I think this is really important.
Cost-wise, real quick, a standard like normal liability coverage policy, he said, is between $800 and $1,000 a year. So that's not that bad, but if you have to have that media libel policy, then that can be sometimes expensive. It depends on what you need.
So did he suggest that starting out you should only get one or both, or depending on how popular you are? Because somebody starting out, they might not have the funds to get that kind of coverage.
Or even the thought process.
Or even the thought, like I said, I didn't even know this was a thing.
I
think it's great you're doing this story.
You would have to consider your topic.
Okay.
Because if it's going to be a political or confrontational,
something that someone can say, he said this about me, it's slander, I'm taking him to court.
If you're doing like great Hollywood stories or something, it's probably not that big a
hair
deal.
products or something like that, you're probably fine.
Although you just never know.
You do not
Because
know.
people get offended about all sorts of things, and so you know, you got to protect yourself.
Be
just
ready.
when you think that you're taking yourself, oh, I'm just going to do this for fun or as a hobby or whatever, you really do need to protect yourself.
He even said, even if you're the guy just helping a friend out with a podcast, because you might have the equipment, you could be liable too.
Okay.
So.
Protect yourself.
We might need to do the story again.
I know.
There's people even in this newsroom that have podcasts.
That's exactly right. Yeah.